It works, and it's not often that a journalist gets to sit here and cross-examine a prosecutor on really what amounts to a slide night, but a slide night of Mark's voyage around life and the world. And Mark, it is embarrassing enough to be at an event that's billed as celebrity talks, but it also has the other intriguing title for this chinwag, Too Many F-Stops. Now, what are you getting at? What do you mean by that?
Well, I must admit I was intrigued by the double entendre of the title, but f-stop, of course, is a photographic term. It refers to the aperture stops on a lens. And in my view, a lot of photographers these days are much too focused on the technical aspects of photography. And these days, cameras are so whiz-bang fantastic that really the electronics and the technical aspects are probably the least important aspect of creative photography. And the actions of the photographer are much more important. I'm reminded about the statement of Ansel Adams, the famous American photographer, who said that if you creating a good photograph is a matter of standing in the right place. And Robert Capa, the famous American photojournalist, said that if you're not creating good photography, you're not standing close enough. Those two aspects, I think, are much more important than what f-stop you use or what speed you use. Yeah.
Now, all right, let's start at the beginning. How did you evolve from a lawyer, a prosecutor, into an amateur and then a semi-professional and now a professional photographer?
Look, I've been taking photographs since I was 12, and when I look back at photographs that I took in my 20s, I was going overseas a lot. I was travelling to the usual sites that people go to overseas, and when I look back at my photographs, I wasn't taking photographs of the sites. I was taking photographs of people looking at the sites. And I think even then I was a little bit aware that my photography was different. I was more focused on taking photographs of people. That's what really interested me, and it has ever since. And I think it was probably in about 1988 that I got my first SLR camera, film camera, and stepped up the level of my photography, and then
And you've stuck with SLR ever since?
I have, yes, but I've been digital since 2001, and I could never go back.
Yeah. And downstairs is the big Mad Square exhibition, the art of the Weimar period up to the beginning of the Nazi government in Germany, and there's quite a lot of photographs there as well. I just wonder if we could indulge in a bit of cross-promotion for a minute, what your feeling is about that exhibition.
Well, I have a real connection with the exhibition because of some personal aspects. My maternal grandparents came from Berlin, so they lived through the Weimar Republic. They left Germany as fleeing Nazism in 1938. So my grandparents lived right through that period. So I have a natural interest in and perhaps affinity for that period in Germany. Another connection, which is quite bizarre, the famous Italian painter Giorgio de Chirico had a great influence on some of those artists from the Weimar period. And actually you'll see his name mentioned there. In 1915, he was living in Turin. And my great-grandfather had a paint factory in Turin in the 1910s and the 1920s. And I only found out very recently that Giorgio de Chirico, one of his paintings, is of my grandfather's factory. So I assumed that he purchased his paints from my grandfather.
And those paints may be actually downstairs on the wall. And of course, Tedeschi is the Italian word for German.
Yes, it's an Italian name which means German, so my ancestors must have been the Hun from the north.
And I think one of your series that we can all remember is quite an old series now, is about 60 Holocaust survivors and the people that helped them, escaped and protected them, that are now living in Australia. It was an extraordinary series and probably one of your biggest commissions ever. How did you come to take that, and what was the experience like doing that series?
Well, actually, this image is one of the Holocaust survivors and his son, and I think there are some of the images of that series. It was a commission for the Sydney Jewish Museum. There were about 60 Holocaust survivors and people who'd saved them in Europe, now living in Australia, that I photographed. And a lot of them, of course, had lived through the period of the Weimar Republic, and so I suppose that's another connection. But it was an amazing commission. It's still the biggest commission that I've had, and it was really weird because at the time that I was taking those photographs, I was engaged in a criminal murder trial in the Supreme Court. So during the day, I was hearing these incredible tales of murder and mayhem that had occurred in New South Wales, and then after court I was meeting these people and hearing incredible tales of escape and suffering that they had gone through during the war period. And of course I had to constantly remind myself that for every one of these people that I was photographing who had the most incredible tales of survival against all of the odds, there were probably 100 or maybe even 1,000 people who had perished during the war. And one had to constantly remind oneself that these people were the exception rather than the rule.
You took a fabulous series of the block in Redfern, which of course now is incredibly different. So really what we've got from your photos is a reminder of really what was once an incredibly important focus on Aboriginal life in the city. And tell us about that and why it's no longer there.
Well, I took the series in 1988 to 1990, and I'd go back there every week and take photographs of the residents and the buildings of the block in Redfern, around Everleigh Street in Redfern. And initially I was met with a lot of suspicion, you know, are you from the police, why are you taking photographs? But what I'd do is the next week I'd come back with prints of photographs that I'd taken of people, and so I got very readily accepted very quickly. And the photographs that I took are now part of history because the block has substantially been demolished. And there's a big controversy about whether there should be residential accommodation rebuilt there. The original intention was to build houses for Aboriginal people to live in central Sydney. And then the previous state government stepped in and said, no, we'll let you build anything except residential accommodation because the social problems are too great. I feel very strongly that it's really important to have a residential presence for Indigenous Australians in central Sydney. It was unique, or almost unique, and it was a very vibrant part of Indigenous Australian life in Sydney. And it's important, I think, to have those residences rebuilt, even if there are social problems. The Holocaust, a series on Aboriginal people at Redfern, is there something driving you to take on portraits of people that have been lost or dispossessed or ill-treated? I suppose there is, yes. I like to take photographs of people who, in one respect or another, are marginalised by society or who have suffered. There's something about suffering that I think creates a character, and if I can capture that character, I think it's important for photography. But in more recent times, I've been photographing a lot of people in the art world. Because of my photographic activity and some very special friendships that I've made, I've been able to meet a whole lot of artists of every different kind, and I've managed to convince a lot of them to allow me to photograph them. So
yes,
it's not that serious.
No, we might come and have a look at those in a minute. But okay. There was another disadvantaged group of people that you took photos of, namely the Italians. And I think in 2005 you went to Italy and did a series, I think the exhibition's been shown about 3 or 4 times, called Femininity and Other Feelings. And this was a big watershed for you. Why was it a watershed?
Yes, I went back with my wife to northern Italy, and again I was taking photographs of people, and I just felt that Italians show their emotions in the public sphere much more than Australians do. And I was trying to capture as many different emotions as I could. And I managed to get a whole lot of emotions that you commonly see, but I also managed to capture a whole lot of very obscure emotional states. And I put it together as a series of 60 photographs that have now been shown in several places, and it excited a lot of interest and a lot of discussion. A lot of people disagreed with my interpretation of the emotions that were shown, and it can promote a lot of discussion amongst viewers. So some of them are shown here, and of course they're against a backdrop of beautiful buildings, beautiful piazze, and typical Italian scenes. And it was really then that I decided I wanted to again ramp up my photography and exhibit more and sell my photographs, and so it's progressed a lot since then. And
the grainy black and white is a terrific effect for all of these series, I think. And we're about to burst into some colour now with the terrific series you did. I think was well known, possibly your most well known series, 20 barristers, that you managed to capture in various modest states with their gowns on, performing, feats of discomfort or pursuing their interests. Lawyers, I would have thought, are notoriously self-conscious about their images, and yet here they all are. How did you manage to persuade them to, in some cases, drop it all?
This one is actually the former president of the Bar Association. She was the first one I photographed.
That's the one on the left.
I thought to myself, if I can convince her to participate, I won't get disbarred for participating in this exercise. And she agreed. Look, I've been taking lots of photographs in and around courthouses of people involved in the law, barristers, court staff, and the buildings that it was taking place in. And the thought occurred to me that I had a unique access as a photographer to people who are involved in the law, and I thought this is a way of showing that barristers, firstly the effect that it has on a barrister to put on their robes, and I know from my own practice that you are transformed by putting on your robes. You become a different person when you're at court and you put on your robes. But beneath those robes are very ordinary people who have ordinary interests and ordinary activities in their everyday lives. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to contrast the two, and that's what I was trying to do in this series. It caused a lot of bemusement when it was shown at the Justice and Police Museum in Phillip Street. And
was it the series that was most posed?
Yes, it was.
Now that one's an interesting one. The one of Nick Cowdery in the little plastic tinny. DPPs can't afford anything larger than that. But the Telegraph, I think, published on page 3 that photograph with a rather aggressive story about Nick Cowdery. And how did you handle that when you saw your photo being used to illustrate that sort of story?
Perhaps firstly I should tell you how I came to take the photograph. I'd been told that Nick Cowdery had a yacht. So I turned up at Pittwater, gave him a call on the mobile phone, come and pick me up, I'm here. So he comes in this orange tinny to pick me up, and we're puttering across Pittwater, and we get to the end of our journey, and I look around and I say, well, where's the yacht? And he said, oh, that got sold 10 years ago. So I thought, oh dear, what am I going to do? How am I going to take him if there's no yacht? And then I thought, well, let's take him in the tinny. And it turned out, I think, to be a much better photograph than if he'd been taken in a yacht. And it was one of the 20 that were exhibited at the Justice and Police Museum. And a few days later, I called this image, I think it was something like keeping the balance or maintaining the balance. The Telegraph, without my permission, took a copy of it, they probably got it off my website, published it on page 3, and in their typical anti-Cowdery fashion at the time, what they called it was up the creek without a paddle. So I had to ring up Nick early in the morning and say this was without my permission, it was not my idea.
You didn't write the caption.
I didn't write the caption. And of course the next day the Telegraph published this abject apology that it was published without permission.
That's unheard of.
Yes.
All right, you mentioned artists earlier and working with artists, and I know you've photographed quite a few, Wendy Sharp, Tracy Moffat, Margaret Woodward, Cherry Hood, Lewis Morley, Lou Klepak, the late Guy Warren, of course your son Simon. What was the difference photographing lawyers and artists? Was one more self-conscious, more difficult as subjects?
Look, artists are such interesting people, and you're trying to capture that special character, the artistic character in a photograph. They're not like lawyers with robes. They have their own psychic robes in a way. They have their own magic around them, which you're trying to capture. I suppose I found that artists are often very self-conscious about their own appearance because they're constantly looking out to capture something that they're going to depict, and they often get terribly self-conscious when the lens is turned on them. And part of the exercise is to try as much as possible to make them comfortable and to make them forget that you're there and that there's a camera there. So one tries, to some degree, I think with all portrait photography, you're trying to make the person completely lose sight of themselves so that you can take the inner person. And that's hard when you first confront a person with a camera, but after a while, if you're talking to them, they will forget, and you can hopefully get an unguarded moment.
I wonder, when you take a photograph, do you prosecute it? Do you, in a sense, bring a prosecutor's eye to the task? In other words, what's the mindset that you have?
No, I think the mindset is quite different. In one sense, it's the same. I think that if you're an advocate in court, if you're going to be successful, you've got to lose sight of yourself. You're telling a story, you're trying to convey an idea or a point or an argument, and if you lose sight of yourself, then I think you're more likely to succeed. As an artist, I think when you're photographing a scene or when you're photographing someone, it's an incredibly intense, emotional occasion. You become deeply gripped by the occasion, and it can become almost painful in that you're trying to capture something, and it can become so intense because you desperately want to capture it, and you don't want to lose the moment, you don't want to lose what you can see, and but I think again, where one loses sight of oneself and one's trying to encourage one's subject to become less self-conscious.
And that famous photo you had in 2009, I think we'll come to it in just a few. There it is, there. Now that has the title "Kissed by the Hotel de Ville," which, of course, is the title of a famous painting by Robert Doisneau in the 1950s, "Kissed by the Hotel de Ville." Why did you use the same name for that picture?
We were walking along the main street of Paris, and we came upon this couple with their gear, and they actually had 3 dogs, and they were almost camped on this main street of Paris with the throng of people going by. And I took a whole lot of photographs of them, and this is the one that I like the most because of the 2 dogs, which of course are almost kissing, and the couple are kind of very much engaged in an embrace. And then I went back to the apartment where we were living, and all of a sudden it dawned on me, that's the town hall of Paris in the background. That's the Hotel de Ville of Paris. And then all of a sudden it came to me, that's exactly the same spot that Robert Doisneau took one of the world's most famous photographs, which he's called Kiss by the Hotel de Ville, of a couple walking down the street amongst the throng of
Here it is.
that photograph there. And it's taken in exactly the same spot. So it's almost like a homage to Robert Doisneau, but it also conveys the incredible changes that have taken place. This is Romance in 1950, I think, or 52, something like that. And of course, Romance in 2009 is a little bit different.
What were the responses? Did you have any interesting responses to this photo? I think you did.
Yes, I did. It was published in the summer edition of the Herald initially, and then it got taken by an online magazine called The Punch, which I think is a Murdoch publication or Murdoch website. And of course, on the internet version of this photograph, the people could log in and blog about what they thought of this photograph. And there were a whole lot of people who wrote in, it reminds me of Paris and wonderful memories, and isn't it terrific? And then there was one person who actually blogged, who I won't name this person. He was a person that many years ago I prosecuted. And his comment was, "Mark, stick to your day job."
Well, I suppose he didn't really mean that. having found, got a guilty verdict. We've got the last one now in this series, which is quite a blast of colour. Shall I Be Mother? And this was, you were a finalist in the National Portrait Competition and the National Portrait Gallery with this 2 years ago. And tell us what the title means and what you had in mind.
Shall I Be Mother is a term that I hadn't heard until I started at the bar. When you get a group of men having morning tea, when you've all been in court together, then the oldest person will sometimes say, then the youngest person is meant to say, "Shall I be mother?" In other words, shall I pour the tea? And when I first heard it, I thought, what? What are you talking about? And I thought about it, and I went and looked it up and found out that it's an old English saying amongst men. Shall I be mother? Shall I pour the tea? This image here is an image, they're all of the same person. They're all my friend, Josephine. And we went out and got some clothing, and I photographed her as 4 different people. Mother, the father, female child, male child. And the title, of course, represents, well, take your pick. What would you like to be? Would you like to be the father figure, the mother figure, a child figure, male child figure, female child figure? These days, we have a choice in a way. We have a lot more choice as to the roles we play today than people did when that very strange saying was originally coined, when people didn't have as much choice as we do now.
Yeah. It's a great setting. Where was it taken?
It was in a very modern warehouse conversion into units in Surrey Hills.
Mm. So when you wake up in the morning, do you want to be a prosecutor or do you want to be a photographer?
I think I'm very fortunate to have
a day job.
To have both. I don't have to make a living from photography, which is a great advantage. So I can do what I really want to do. I can photograph what I want to photograph. I don't have to photograph weddings and bar mitzvahs and or advertising or anything like that. So that's a great luxury. It's a great privilege. So I can do what really motivates me.
And do you teach photography?
I do a lot of talks on photography. I'm invited to camera clubs and Rotary clubs and the Art Gallery Society here, and I've taught photography at Sydney Grammar School. I was the artist in residence there for a month in 2009, which was a great privilege. So I do a bit of teaching and talks as well, which is a great thrill. But I think it's a lovely combination, and it enables me to use both sides of my brain to be able to be the lawyer and the photographer. The photography keeps me sane.
Well, thanks very much for talking tonight. It's been terrific, Mark Tedeschi, QC, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.